By this point in the book, something subtle has already happened. We're no longer talking about markets in isolation. We're no longer debating strategies, probabilities, or even behavior in the narrow sense. The conversation has slowly shifted towards something deeper. It's about how people see the world through money. In the earlier parts, Morgan Housel helped us understand why people act the way they do with finances. How personal history shapes decisions. How luck and risk distort outcomes. How survival matters more than brilliance. And how the hardest part of money isn't earning it, it's managing the emotions that come with it. Now, the book takes a wider view. Because once you understand individual behavior, the next question becomes unavoidable. What happens when millions of individuals, each with their own fears, incentives, and blind spots, interact with each other? This is where money stops being just personal and starts becoming social, cultural, psychological at scale. Housel begins examining how our financial beliefs are shaped not just by what we experience, but by what we see others experiencing. How comparison quietly rewires ambition. How pessimism spreads faster than optimism. How narratives become more powerful than facts. And how, when uncertainty is high, people will cling to almost any explanation that feels comforting. These chapters aren't meant to teach you how to invest better. They're meant to help you see more clearly. Because many of the financial mistakes people make don't come from ignorance. They come from copying the wrong reference points. From believing stories that sound reasonable. From assuming that what worked for someone else must work for them too. This part of the book asks uncomfortable questions. Why does bad news feel more convincing than good news? Why do we confuse complexity with intelligence? Why do we struggle to accept that the world doesn't owe us linear outcomes? And most importantly, how do we protect our judgment in a world that constantly pressures us to compare, conform, and react? Part 4 is quieter than what came before. But it's also more revealing. Because it shows that the greatest financial risks aren't always in the market. Sometimes, they live in our assumptions. In our stories. In the way we interpret what's happening around us. And once you see that clearly, you can't unsee it. That's where we begin. Chapter 16, You and Me. One of the most uncomfortable ideas in the psychology of money appears in this chapter, because it forces us to confront something we rarely admit out loud. Other people's financial decisions are not made for your world. They're made for theirs. Housel calls this chapter You and Me for a reason. Because most of the confusion, frustration, and bad imitation in money comes from forgetting that simple distinction. We look at what others earn, how they invest, how much risk they take, and how fast they grow. And without realizing it, we begin to treat their outcomes as benchmarks for our own lives. But the problem is subtle and dangerous. We are comparing our inside to other people's outside. We don't see their fears. We don't see their safety nets. We don't see the sacrifices they've accepted or the risks they can afford to take. We only see the result. Housel points out that people don't want the same things from money. Some want independence. Some want status. Some want security. Some want optionality. And yet, we often judge success as if everyone is playing the same game. This is where comparison quietly becomes destructive. When you compare yourself to someone who wants a different outcome, you begin chasing goals that were never meant for you. You adopt risks that don't align with your life. You feel pressure to accelerate, even when patience would serve you better. The tragedy isn't that comparison exists. It's that it pushes people to abandon strategies that were working for them. Housel reminds us that money decisions are deeply personal. They're shaped by temperament, family, health, ambition, and tolerance for stress. Two people can look at the same opportunity and make opposite choices. And both can be right. Not because the numbers differ, but because their lives do. One of the quiet insights in this chapter is that envy is a signal, not a solution. When we envy someone's financial outcome, what we're really seeing is a mismatch between what they optimized for and what we want. But instead of asking, "Do I want their life?" we ask, "Why don't I have their results?" That question leads us in the wrong direction. Housel argues that the goal of money is not to maximize returns at all costs. It's to support a life that aligns with who you are. That means your strategy should fit your personality, not impress an audience. The danger of ignoring this is not just financial loss. It's regret. People often realize too late that they chased numbers, when what they wanted was peace, or freedom, or time. And money, when used poorly, can take those things away instead of protecting them. This chapter quietly dismantles the idea that there is a single definition of financial success. There isn't. There is only alignment. When your goals, risks, and expectations match your life, money becomes a tool. When they don't, money becomes a source of constant dissatisfaction. And that sets the stage for what comes next. Because once you understand how comparison distorts judgment, the next question becomes more unsettling. Why do the most negative stories about money feel so convincing? That's where Housel takes us next. Into the strange and powerful seduction of pessimism. Chapter 17, The Seduction of Pessimism. There's a reason bad financial news spreads faster than good news. It's not because the world is always getting worse. And it's not because optimism is naive. It's because pessimism sounds smart. Morgan Housel opens this chapter by pointing out something we instinctively recognize. Stories about decline, collapse, and failure feel more serious than stories about progress. When someone predicts disaster, we listen. When someone predicts steady improvement, we shrug. Pessimism grabs attention because it feels urgent. It carries the weight of warning. It signals intelligence, caution, and realism, even when it's exaggerated. Optimism, on the other hand, often feels boring. Progress happens slowly. It lacks drama. It doesn't trigger the same emotional response. And so, pessimistic narratives dominate how we talk about money. Housel makes an important distinction here. He isn't saying that pessimism is wrong. He's saying that pessimism is persuasive in a way optimism rarely is. Bad news is easier to explain. A crash has a clear cause. A mistake has a villain. A crisis has a story with a beginning, middle, and end. Good news is messier. Economic progress comes from millions of small, unremarkable improvements. There's no single hero. No dramatic moment. No headline. This imbalance creates a distorted perception of reality. We begin to feel like the financial world is always on the brink of disaster, even during periods of long-term growth. Housel reminds us that markets have historically moved upward over time. Not because the path was smooth, but because human ingenuity quietly solved problems as they appeared. But pessimism focuses our attention on the problems, not the solutions that follow. One of the most powerful ideas in this chapter is that short-term setbacks are visible, while long-term progress is invisible. Recessions are loud. Crashes are dramatic. Losses are painful and immediate. Growth, on the other hand, compounds silently. It happens in the background. You don't notice it day to day. So when we judge the world based on what feels most intense, we end up with a skewed understanding. This is why people often believe that things are getting worse, even as living standards improve over generations. Housel also explains how pessimism becomes profitable. Media, predictions, and commentary are rewarded for attention. And nothing captures attention like fear. Predicting disaster carries little cost. If it doesn't happen, it's forgotten. If it does, the prediction feels prophetic. Optimism, however, demands patience. And patience doesn't sell well. This creates a cycle where negative narratives are constantly reinforced. Not because they're more accurate, but because they're more engaging. The danger of this isn't just emotional. It's behavioral. When people are surrounded by pessimistic stories, they become overly cautious. They delay decisions. They miss opportunities. They protect against unlikely risks while ignoring probable gains. Housel isn't arguing for blind optimism. He's arguing for balanced realism. A mindset that acknowledges uncertainty without assuming catastrophe. A perspective that recognizes risk without becoming paralyzed by it. Because pessimism, when left unchecked, doesn't make us safer. It makes us reactive. This chapter quietly prepares us for the next idea. If pessimistic stories feel compelling, and if people crave explanations during uncertain times, then the next question becomes inevitable. What happens when people start believing stories simply because they want certainty? That's where the book goes next. Into why, under pressure, people will believe almost anything. Chapter 18, When You'll Believe Anything. There are moments in life when uncertainty becomes so uncomfortable that any explanation feels better than none. Morgan Housel begins this chapter by pointing out a simple but unsettling truth. When outcomes are confusing and emotions are high, people don't look for accuracy. They look for relief. And that's when belief becomes dangerous. This chapter explores why, during periods of stress, volatility, or change, people gravitate towards stories that offer certainty. Even if those stories are incomplete, exaggerated, or flat-out wrong. Housel explains that humans have a deep need to make sense of chaos. When something bad happens, we want a reason. A cause. A narrative that ties events together in a way that feels understandable. The problem is that the world doesn't always cooperate. Many financial outcomes don't have clean explanations. Markets move for countless reasons, most of them invisible. Luck and randomness play larger roles than we're comfortable admitting. But randomness is emotionally unsatisfying. So we replace it with stories. These stories don't need to be true. They just need to feel convincing. Housel notes that people are far more likely to accept a bad explanation than no explanation at all. Because uncertainty feels like a threat. And belief, even flawed belief, feels like control. This is why conspiracy theories, overly confident predictions, and simplistic explanations flourish during times of crisis. They offer clarity. They reduce anxiety. They tell us who to blame. And once a story takes hold, it becomes self-reinforcing. Evidence that supports it is amplified. Evidence that contradicts it is ignored. Soon, belief becomes identity. In financial markets, this behavior shows up in dangerous ways. People pile into ideas not because they've been carefully evaluated, but because they offer comfort. They explain losses. They promise certainty in an uncertain world. Housel isn't criticizing curiosity. He's warning against overconfidence masquerading as understanding. The more complex a system becomes, the more tempting it is to oversimplify it. But oversimplification doesn't reduce risk. It hides it. One of the quiet lessons in this chapter is that the desire to believe is strongest when evidence is weakest. When outcomes are clear, we don't need stories. But when outcomes are ambiguous, stories rush in to fill the gap. This is why false certainty is so seductive. It removes doubt. It feels empowering. It gives people the illusion that they know what's coming next. But in reality, it often does the opposite. It locks people into rigid thinking, making them less adaptable when reality changes. Housel reminds us that acknowledging uncertainty is not a weakness. It's a strength. The most resilient people are not those who claim to know the future. They're the ones who accept that they don't, and plan accordingly. They leave room for error. They avoid absolute beliefs. They stay humble in the face of complexity. Because the moment you believe you fully understand what's happening, you stop listening. And that's when risk quietly increases. This chapter flows naturally into the next, where Housel steps back and ties many of these ideas together. Because if belief, pessimism, comparison, and uncertainty all shape behavior, the real question becomes, how do these forces interact? And what can we do about them? That's where everything starts coming together. Chapter 19, All Together Now. By the time we reach this chapter, Morgan Housel isn't trying to convince us of anything new. He's trying to make sure we don't forget what we've already learned. Because the psychology of money doesn't work in fragments. It works as a system. Every idea in this book, luck, risk, behavior, pessimism, belief, comparison, survival, overlaps with the others. And when they combine, they shape outcomes far more powerfully than intelligence or effort ever could. Housel reminds us that most financial success stories look clean only in hindsight. In real time, they're messy. They involve doubt, fear, mistakes, and long stretches where nothing seems to work. What separates those who endure from those who don't is rarely brilliance. It's resilience. One of the most important themes he returns to here is that survival is the foundation of compounding. You can't benefit from long-term growth if you don't stay in the game. And staying in the game has very little to do with maximizing returns. It has everything to do with avoiding ruin. Housel emphasizes that catastrophic failure often comes from a handful of decisions. Not because they were obviously foolish, but because they left no room for error. People assume that because something worked for a long time, it will keep working. They confuse a streak with a guarantee. And when multiple assumptions fail at once, the outcome isn't a setback. It's an ending. This is where the earlier discussions about behavior become unavoidable. Overconfidence doesn't announce itself. It builds quietly during periods of success. Pessimism doesn't feel irrational. It feels protective after loss. Belief doesn't start as delusion. It starts as a desire for certainty. These traits are human. And because they're human, they show up again and again. Housel's insight is not that we should eliminate these tendencies, but that we should design our financial lives to withstand them. That means favoring strategies that don't require perfect decisions. Plans that don't depend on flawless discipline. Systems that can survive bad timing, wrong assumptions, and emotional reactions. This is why he repeatedly favors being reasonable over being rational. Rational strategies look optimal on paper. But reasonable strategies are the ones people can actually stick with. when fear shows up, when markets fall, and when narratives turn hostile. Another quiet idea in this chapter is humility. Not humility in the sense of lowering ambition, but humility in acknowledging how unpredictable the world really is. Housel argues that progress comes not from certainty, but from flexibility. From recognizing that no one sees the full picture, and planning as if we could be wrong. When all these ideas are viewed together, a pattern emerges. The most dangerous financial decisions aren't dramatic. They're subtle. They come from assuming stability, trusting recent trends, and overestimating our ability to adapt under pressure. And the most effective financial behaviors aren't heroic. They're boring. They prioritize durability over excitement, survival over ego, consistency over perfection. This chapter doesn't give instructions. It offers perspective. It asks us to step back and evaluate whether our approach to money is built for reality, or for an idealized version of ourselves that only exists when conditions are favorable. Because money doesn't test us in isolation. It tests everything at once. And understanding how these forces interact is the difference between strategies that look good and strategies that last. That reflection leads naturally to the final chapter. One where Housel stops analyzing behavior at a distance, and instead shares what all of this means to him personally. That's where the book quietly comes to rest. Chapter 20, Confessions. This final chapter doesn't try to teach you anything new. Instead, it does something far more difficult. It asks you to be honest. Morgan Housel steps away from analysis here and speaks in the first person, not to persuade, but to clarify. He acknowledges something that quietly undercuts most financial advice. Every strategy is personal. What works for one person is inseparable from their life. Their temperament, their fears, their luck, and the era they happen to live through. Housel doesn't pretend otherwise. He admits that his own views on money are shaped by stability, by time, and by experiences that allowed patience to work in his favor. And that honesty matters, because it reinforces a truth we've seen throughout the book. Money decisions are not spreadsheets. They're reflections of who we are. One of the most striking moments in this chapter is when Housel explains why he avoids debt and leverage almost entirely. Not because he believes they are always wrong, but because he knows himself. He knows that debt reduces flexibility, that leverage magnifies stress, that even mathematically sound strategies can become emotionally unbearable under pressure. So he chooses simplicity. He chooses margin. He chooses plans that allow him to sleep at night. That example quietly echoes earlier chapters. It's room for error, expressed as a life choice. Housel also talks about independence, not as a luxury, but as the highest form of wealth. To him, wealth is not about buying things. It's about controlling time. The ability to wake up and decide what to do next. The freedom to say no. The option to walk away. This is why he resists the constant pressure to optimize. Because optimization often trades freedom for numbers. And numbers, on their own, don't create peace. He introduces the idea of enough again here. Not as a rule, but as a realization. Enough is when additional gains no longer improve your life. When chasing more starts costing you what you already have. Housel points out that many people don't fail financially because they lack skill. They fail because they never define enough. The goalpost keeps moving. Comparison keeps whispering. And eventually, risk increases not out of need, but out of restlessness. One of the most human confessions in this chapter is that Housel expects his views to change. He doesn't frame this as uncertainty. He frames it as wisdom. Life will introduce new risks, new responsibilities, new perspectives. And the ability to adapt your financial philosophy is more valuable than clinging to consistency. That idea quietly dismantles the illusion of mastery. There is no final strategy, no permanent allocation, no formula that outlives context. There is only alignment between money and life, as it exists right now. As the book comes to an end, the message becomes almost gentle. You don't need to be the smartest person in the room. You don't need perfect timing. You don't need to predict the future. You need a plan that lets you survive. A mindset that resists comparison. And a definition of success that doesn't collapse under pressure. Money, in the end, is not about winning. It's about endurance. About building a life that doesn't require constant defense. About choosing strategies you can hold through uncertainty. About knowing when enough is truly enough. And when you reach that point, money stops being the thing that controls you. It becomes something far better. A quiet support system for a life well lived. That's where this book leaves us. Not with urgency. Not with fear. But with clarity. As this book comes to a close, there's something important to notice. Nothing we've discussed was really about money. Not in the narrow sense. This was never a book about markets, returns, or financial tricks. It was a book about people. About how we behave when the future is uncertain. About how fear, pride, patience, and comparison quietly shape our decisions. Morgan Housel never tried to give us a perfect system. Because he understood something most advice ignores. There is no universal formula for money. What works depends on who you are. What you've lived through. What you value. And what you're willing to live with. Across these chapters, one message kept returning in different forms. Survival matters more than brilliance. Consistency matters more than intensity. And peace of mind matters more than optimization. The most dangerous mistakes don't come from ignorance. They come from forgetting our limits. From copying others without understanding their lives. From chasing more without asking what it costs. The most successful financial lives are rarely the most impressive. They're the most aligned. Aligned with temperament. Aligned with priorities. Aligned with a definition of enough that doesn't keep moving. If there's one quiet skill this book asks us to develop, it's self-awareness. To know when risk energizes us, and when it exhausts us. To know when ambition serves us, and when it traps us. To know when money is helping us live, and when we're living for money. Because money is only powerful when it supports life. When it gives time, freedom, and choice. When it reduces stress instead of creating it. That is the psychology of money. If this series added clarity to how you think about money, consider subscribing to the channel. We break down books not to summarize them, but to sit with their ideas long enough for them to change how we think. More books are coming. Different themes. Different questions. Same depth. And if there's one thing this book leaves us with, it's this. Money is a tool. But understanding yourself is the real wealth. We'll continue exploring that, one book at a time.